Hi everyone, I'm delighted you could join us today. My name is Samantha Taylor and I'm the Senior Analyst at IFI Global. Welcome to the second webcast we have hosted this year on climate data related matters. The reason we are hosting this discussion today is that we are expanding our selection intelligence service capability into climate risk for GPs and LPs. But we also wanted to use this opportunity to share with you what we have discovered on climate risk provider selection over the last few months, and particularly since we launched the climate risk tracker in SII. Simon and I are going to give a presentation on the topics for approximately 25 minutes, and then we'll go to questions. We very much welcome your questions, so please do use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to ask us anything. We know that there are a number of people that are not able to join us for the live session today, but we have questions from a couple of them, which we will come to later on as well. I will now hand you over to Simon Osborne, the CEO of IFI Global.
Thank you very much, Samantha, and welcome. Delighted you could join us this afternoon. As Samantha says, my name is Simon Osborne. I am the CEO of IFI Global. We are a research and a media house based in the City of London. And I should emphasize, I said research first there because we're probably slightly larger on our research side than on our media side. But on our media side, we have three publications. One of them is Sustainable Investment Intelligence, which now includes, as a major part of it, almost like a publication within the publication, the Climate Risk Tracker. And this, as Samantha says, is the second webcast we've done already this year on climate-related matters. And we did one last autumn in follow-up to research we did with LPs on their climate data preferences. So it's becoming a regular feature of what we do. It's a useful addition. It's a complementary addition to the much more granular and much more detailed information on the same subjects that we're going to be talking about today that you will find in SII. Also, as Samantha says, the immediate reason for hosting this webcast is to launch what we're calling Climate SIS. That stands for Selection Intelligence Service, which is something we've started in another part of our business. I'll come on and say a bit about that in a few minutes' time. But it's we're adapting what we've been doing in other areas of the business for climate, and it's what it does is educates the marketplace on the topic itself. So in this case, on it'll be LPs and GPs on climate-related issues, and it helps them, if they wish to have that help, in finding the right providers in this increasingly important area of investment management. It's becoming more complex and more specialist. I obviously don't need to tell you that. But as that's happening, we notice that there are more specialist providers coming along, which are offering certain different things, perhaps from others, in their own particular way. So today we are going to be covering these five areas that are on the screen. The evolution of climate data selection, recent developments in climate oversight, to give you a quick overview of some of the more recent things that we're seeing that are going on, selection advice for GPs and LPs. We know some GPs and LPs are going to be following this, so that's obviously more for them. Climate data selection, one of the issues that comes up quite a lot, we notice, is what should particularly LPs, but also GPs, do in terms of taking stuff from third-party providers or doing it themselves in-house. Finally, we will spend a minute talking about climate SIS before we finish. So climate data selection evolution, I think it's worth reminding ourselves, all of us, because it's easy to forget how unbelievably recent the whole climate data development is at least in the investment industry. I'm not talking about, going back to the 1980s or the 1990s in terms of, global warming. I'm talking about the incorporation of climate-related matters into investment management, portfolio management, etc. It really doesn't date much further back than the TCFD, which came in 2015, 2017. That changed pretty much everything, and from that moment onwards, we've now got a really serious business. And look, that's only 10 years ago, if that, when this has happened. And one of the things that's quite interesting, if you go back and look at the stuff that was published or brought up thanks to the TCFD, the disclosures, etc., at the end of the last decade, beginning of this one, quite a lot of the stuff was for 2030 or obviously 2050, which at that time seemed like an awful long time away in the future. 2030 is only what, 3.5 years away now. And we're all going to be finding that so many of those goals are going to be missed by some considerable extent. But we haven't got time to go into the history. Let's talk about today and what's going on in the near or the further future. So the one of the things we see in climate data selection evolution at the moment is nature risk. Samantha, do you want to chip in on that?
Yes, so what we've been seeing through the LP disclosures is a focus on nature risk. Now, this is obviously very much emerging. Not all of them are assessing nature risk, but a lot have expressed their intention and plans to put through nature-related kind of assessments going forward. Obviously, through our environmental investment monitor, we have spotted an uptick in allocations towards natural capital, biodiversity, agriculture, which they're also seeing nature as an opportunity, but they are also looking at it from a risk lens. So you got pension funds such as AP7. They have implemented nature risk assessments for the AP7 equity fund, but you will see a lot more of this in the next cycle of disclosures.
I just add to what Samantha said there that, as I'm sure most of you know, AP7 is a major Swedish pension fund, one of the seven in the AP series in Sweden. And when she mentions the EIM, the Environmental Investment Monitor, that's another feature, another part of our publication, Sustainable Investment Intelligence, which she says looks very much at what's going on in nature. So moving on to the impact of AI, that's obviously going to make a huge difference here.
Yes, it really lends itself to having more sophisticated climate risk assessments, especially for asset managers. You know, they will be able to quite quickly get hold of, very detailed location specific data used for, by the investment teams to screen an opportunity, but also to incorporate findings into underwriting of deals. So it's a large opportunity to be had. So far, I believe BlackRock's Aladdin platform uses AI, and so does Jupiter Intelligence. So you're definitely going to see more of it going forward.
Yeah, and looking a little bit beyond today's developments into the near future, into the next couple of years, what do we see? I think in particular, we would very strongly forecast stroke predict that you're going to see much more specific location data. That's already happening, but it's just going to get more and more specific all the time. And with that, we see a much greater focus on renewables because in another area of SII, we do a lot of work on what's going on in renewables. Indeed, we've got an article in this month's issue on that. And one of the problems, paradoxically, of renewable development is it's being very heavily impacted, particularly the offshore wind farms, by climate change. So the turbines, which cost an absolute fortune to develop and put in, they're having to be replaced at an earlier date than was originally anticipated. Makes a substantial difference to the economics of the investment. So there is a crying, desperate need for much more accurate data, not just in offshore wind, but in all forms of sustainability, including solar, but particularly any form of wind. Samantha, have you got anything you want to say about the future?
Yes, I mean, back to wind assets. Obviously, you've got Aberdeen City Council suing Hermes Investment, Hermes Infrastructure on behalf of the North East Scotland Pension Fund due to catastrophic devaluation of wind farm assets due to downside risk. Back in 2019, when they entered into the investment, the wind assets, which relate to the Ventus portfolio, so it's 5 Swedish wind farms, were valued at over £100 million. As of the 30th of September last year, they were valued at £17 million.
My God.
So
Yeah.
quite a hit.
And that is a very dramatic example of why we're going to need very quickly much better data, climate risk data in the renewable space. Moving on quickly, recent developments. Here are some recent developments in what's going on that we see in climate risk. So there's 3 ones that have come up quite recently. Samantha, do you want to touch on those?
Yes. So within the last year, you're seeing a changing litigation landscape as it relates to climate risk management and assessment. Um, so Chubb and BP are really key examples of the increasing investor pressure onto corporates for climate risk management and assessment. Those of you that are based out of the UK might find the BP case quite interesting. They have recently, within the last 2 weeks, rejected shareholder proposals asking for disclosures as to how it intends to remain profitable going forward, including any disclosures as to their management of transition risk. This is a very unprecedented case in UK corporate governance for a corporate to reject a shareholder proposal. Cushman and Wakefield is a US case that relates to a failure to assess material climate-related financial risks to a actively managed fund. It is very underperforming. So yes, there's that. Then moving into the pension funds again. Obviously, you have major Dutch pension fund PFZW dropping investment mandates from BlackRock and Legal & General Investment Management due to, I guess, them failing to manage climate risk effectively, and they no longer align with where the fund wants to invest. Obviously, more recently, you have New York State Comptroller suggesting that city pension funds drop BlackRock again, Fidelity, and Pan Angora Asset Management for the same thing. And then we move into climate reports. So the report done by the Climate Tracker Initiative found that investors, including central banks, are fundamentally underestimating physical climate risk in their economic models. The OECD report is in relation to real estate. They suggest that whilst real estate is highly vulnerable to location-specific physical risks, climate risk is not fully integrated into investment frameworks. And again, Share Action report mirrors this sentiment. Their analysis of the largest real estate investment managers found significant shortcomings in the management of climate risk.
That was in the real estate sector, wasn't it? I think
it was in the real estate. And obviously, in the latest issue of our publication, SII, we have come across similar findings in our own analysis of 20 of the largest real estate investment strategies.
Yeah, so we're just giving you the sort of surface stuff for brevity of time. If these are subjects of interest to you, it's covered in much more detail in SII. Right, moving on to selection advice for GPs and LPs. One of the things that as we've got into this, we were getting into this a lot last year. I already said, we launched the climate risk tracker in January, but obviously a lot of work was done before that. One of the things that really has hit us between the eyes, if that's the right way of putting it, is how much it can change strategy by strategy in terms of the approach that both GPs taking and what LPs investing in that strategy want. It's I think in some respects misleading to just talk about either private markets overall or investment management overall. You've really got to get strategy specific. I'm going to talk in a few minutes about some research we're going to do with GPs, strategy by strategy. And I think that is the way to go, because you have, and we will, when we do climate SIS, we'll be saying that very much to the GPs. There are certain firms that are stronger in certain areas, perhaps than others, if that's the right way of putting it. There are some that are strong in most areas, but not necessarily all. Some that are very specific to one particular area. There's one firm that we know is basically pretty much only private equity, and that's it. And then others will do that amongst many other things. So it is a strategy by strategy approach. Samantha, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Yes. So obviously the use of climate risk assessments does vary by strategy, not just by manager. Importantly, the integration of outputs from these assessments are used at different points as well through each strategy. So private equity will by and large use it for pre-investment screening and due diligence. For infrastructure, its transition risk assessments are really used at exit. Obviously, that's when value is crystallized, and you have to take into account like carbon pricing and investor preference and all that kind of stuff. So we are seeing a large difference in how managers through each different strategy utilize climate risk assessments.
And then moving on to discrepancies in data sets. I think I'm right in saying, Samantha, this is probably more your speciality too, in that we see some GPs taking a bunch of data sets in order to try and, what's the right way of putting it, average them out. Is that the right way to put it or not?
Yes, some asset managers, I believe it's Gresham House, they take an average of four climate data providers per hazard and take the average from that, because they know that there are variances within each of the data sets. But by and large, from our research, we found that real estate and infrastructure managers are very, very wary of the discrepancies within climate data, especially within emissions. So they tend to work with their portfolio companies for direct disclosures as to their footprints, but also any kind of physical risk incidences that they have experienced.
Yeah, and something you were keen to put into this presentation, the importance of transparency in this. If you can.
Yes, this is really important for GPs. Obviously, there's a large push, especially within real estate, that our research has uncovered the variances in their approach. But you have asset managers such as Patrizia really working on creating standardized methodology based on transparent scenario pathways and data use for real estate. But for LPs, obviously transparency is very important for assessing different portfolios. So if they all use different data sets and are not kind of transparent about what ones they use, it's very hard for them to measure kind of what portfolio provides them with least risk exposure, I guess.
Right. And finally, because we very much focus both on GPs and LPs, and obviously there's huge and enormous differences. We're going to come on and say something about that in just in a second. But to you, this is an expression, Samantha, I think you came up with. Adaptation and resilience is the key words in terms of most important thing in selection. When GPs are selecting climate data providers, that's what they're mostly looking for, is adaptation and resilience. Is that correct?
Yes. This is obviously very key for, real asset managers, because they want to maximize value, especially for those with renewable energy strategies such as Gore Street. You're looking at kind of optimizing performance of certain assets like wind. So you will have to take into account any additional, build or design kind of considerations for that. And obviously, the outcome is that you want a resilient portfolio in the long run.
And then LPs, very much, it's all about You don't want that anything like that level of detail, but you're talking about they want stuff with actionable insights.
Yes, so this definitely came up with Canadian and US pension funds. They don't want raw data. They don't want to, have to use external experts to understand certain things. They want real world things that they can actually do. They want actual insights.
Right. And I think we're going to say that in a slightly different way here in some with some examples. So for GP data integration it's really largely about putting climate into their existing risk management frameworks. Do you want to say something on that?
Yes, so obviously GPs have their existing systems in place. They will supplement where they have proprietary climate risk assessment tools. They will still use third-party climate data to supplement these tools going forward. A lot in infrastructure, such as 3I infrastructure, IFM, KKR, all do this. Yeah, so it's very prevalent within that. We've also got LPs such as UniSuper, the Australian Superannuation Fund. They do use third-party data, but sometimes they will override it with their own data. So that is quite interesting. They haven't disclosed what instances they would do that for, though. But it's still interesting nonetheless.
Right. And LPs are looking for a software solution rather than the data solution is probably the right way of putting it, is it? Rather than they're not necessarily looking for raw data from third-party providers, they're looking for software to manage the overall view of what is going on in their portfolio. Is that a fair
Yes, yes.
way of describing
Um,
it?
so by and large, obviously, LPs such as pension funds take a top-down approach to climate risk assessments. They are still generally emission focused, so will screen managers and ensure that they're within certain pathways. I think that off the top of my head, OMAS does use third-party data providers for specific portfolios, such as infrastructure, but it's not across their whole portfolio and multiple strategies. It's very much specific ones that they use it for.
Here's an interesting development, and we're talking about the future of climate risk earlier and the evolution. We should have perhaps mentioned it then, but we'll mention it now instead. Is there are a number of we're coming across probably a growing number, not a huge number, but a growing number of particularly pension funds who are working with universities, certainly in the UK and I think Australia, and I'm sure elsewhere too. There is a development in academia of climate as an academic subject. Universities are working with pension funds to really understand more about this going forward. And indeed, business schools as well. EdHec, the French business school, did a very impressive and very detailed report on infrastructure. I think it was the year before last, but can you give other examples? I know Oxford University, where Samantha and I are both at London School of Economics, where they have the Grantham Institute that's doing work in this area. Do you want to give other examples?
Yes, so just to add on to EdHec, they've obviously developed their climate risk assessment tool for infrastructure. But back to the pension funds, OMA's obviously a Canadian pension fund, their infrastructure team worked alongside Oxford University to implement third-party climate data analysis tool for that asset. Nest, a UK pension fund, also seconded a researcher from Oxford back in 2023, 2024 to assess physical climate risk, but also nature risk.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of
And
collaboration.
I think you said to me earlier that they're using the universities or the people they're seconding from the universities to make better understand how to use the data. Is that a fair way of putting it?
Yes, yes. Obviously, in the universities, you have climate experts that know how to work with data, and pension funds probably reasonable to suggest that they don't. But you also have GPs who are also working with universities. You've got CD&R, working with Columbia's climate school. This is really, a partnership to address climate risk assessments, but it's also used to upskill their portfolio companies' senior executives. So it's really instilling this kind of understanding of climate risk and
Yeah,
how
and I
to
know
use.
in Australia there are a number of where as I'm sure everyone following this webcast knows very well, where climate is taken really seriously. There are a number of other examples we could give in this area as well. It's certainly a very interesting area. Right now, climate selection intelligence service, or climate SIS. What is it? As I said in my introduction, it's actually, as well as selection, it's about education. A lot of the GPs and LPs in the climate sector don't necessarily need our uh, what do you want to put it, skills, or if that's the right word, our educational side, but we can give it to them. We can certainly give them data, we can certainly give them information, and we're very good, we like to think, of giving examples of how other GPs or LPs in the particular category that they're in are doing it, so they can benchmark, if that's the right word, how they want to do it in comparison with the others in their particular category. Selection Intelligence Service is something we've had at iFi Global for a long time. Started out in for independent directors, for managers looking for independent directors for the boards of their funds, and particularly for American managers coming to Europe or going offshore for the first time. We help them understand what they need to do in terms of governance, and then in some cases, not in all cases, but in a few cases, we would introduce them not to one individual person, but to a short list of individuals who they would then take up to talk to, and then it was up to them as to what they did with it. That's the same principle as we're doing in climate, because we know, by the way, in outside climate, we then moved on to Mancos. We've advised, again, particularly US managers who need help finding the right third-party Manco in Dublin or Luxembourg or wherever it may be. If they're coming to Europe, give them the inside intelligence on what's really going on there, because we're often a supplier to those entities. We see it from a very different point of view from many of the others in the business who'd like to know something about it. So that's what we've been doing. It's not a major part of our business, but it is something we've offered as a free service for our subscribers. And it's been part of what we've done, as I say, for a long time. The development now is that we're taking the same principle for climate. So we are hoping and expecting, we haven't had anyone yet happen, it hasn't happened to us yet, but we will have particularly sustainable managers where we have some very strong relationships with renewable or natural capital managers or others in the sustainable area. We will help them, guide them, and we're not going to ever say pick X over Y or A over B. We'll just give them a short list of providers that they might want to talk to, and we'll hopefully give them a few differences and similarities in the approaches that they take. So that's what we're starting to do now. And as I've said already a couple of times, we think this is very strategy specific. I would go further than that. I would say each situation is different. What is right for GPX may not be right for GPY, even in the same strategy. Certainly in different strategies, that would be the case. And the other thing that's important, and I do think this will happen, perhaps we should put this, we should have put under the evolution, is we think there will be in future, if there isn't already, more of a distinction between what a fund manager does at board level in terms of assessing climate risk and what that same manager does at the portfolio management level. At the moment, in most board meetings, we have another publication, by the way, that focuses on investment boards. So it's an area we know quite a lot about. They tend to take the data from the portfolio managers. If they're doing their job properly, they should be taking different feeds from different providers in the same area, just to make sure that they're getting an independent assessment of the risk in this particular area. We did a research study with Fathom, I think it was about 18 months ago, which I think is the only climate risk governance research ever done on boards in the insurance, banking, and investment management business. That was global. It was fascinating to see. I didn't know until we did that study how seriously this is taken in the Asia Pacific region, not just in Australia, but in the Philippines, Japan, South Korea, Malaysia, and Singapore, all those areas. The penalties for getting it wrong at board level are really serious. And if we can help boards make the right decisions in that regard, then no, I think hopefully we'll be doing something useful. So before we go to any questions we might have, let me quickly finish by telling you what's coming up at SII. We, as I think we've mentioned already, are going to be undertaking what's going to be probably a very substantial research study for a little period of time, strategy by strategy, and we're going to do it in a series of different strategies where we're going to go out and really examine what GPs all around the world, not just in the UK or US, but all around the world, including the Asia Pacific region, particularly, in fact, the Asia Pacific region, as well as Europe and the US, are doing in terms of how they're assessing climate risk. And we will then follow that up with a webcast. We are consulting our subscribers on what goes into the questionnaire by strategy. So if you are a subscriber, please do get in touch with us if you have, and we'll share with you our draft questionnaire that we are just beginning to put together now on that. Once we finish that study, we are going to have in SII a guide for GPs and LPs on climate data selection. And climate risk tracker is a very important part of what we're doing in SII. Samantha, if you wouldn't mind just telling the audience, we collect data on, is it 7 pieces of criteria per GP and 6 or by LP? And if you could quickly tell everyone what those are, because we're building that up. So we'll hopefully have hundreds, not thousands, of GPs and LPs and look at how they do manage climate risk. What are the assessments?
Yes, so on the LP side, our methodologies are what part of transition risk is the focus. So whether it's, reputational litigation, low carbon, geopolitical even. Then we assess, does the LP leverage external specialists and who? So whether it's universities, actuarials, just consultants. Does the LP use third-party climate data providers and what ones? What strategies or assets do they use climate risk analysis for? Obviously, our findings so far is that they haven't rolled it out across the whole portfolio. It's only a small subsection of assets, especially within private markets. It's generally just infrastructure. Then moving on, how have they altered their investment strategy in response to climate risk analysis? And then finally, for the LPs, is the LP relying on their asset managers' assessment of climate risk, or do they have their own strategy for mitigation? So that was quite an interesting one. Now, on the GP side, we monitor whether there is enhanced due diligence processes for high-risk assets. So far in our analysis, we found that is the case for real estate strategies. Then we have, at what point during the analysis of the investment opportunity is climate risk considered? This fluctuates obviously from strategy to strategy. Does the GP use third-party climate data providers? And finally, has the GP created any proprietary climate risk tools, or do they rely on external data providers?
Right. So let's go and stop sharing screen and go to questions from we've had before this discussion today. The first one is can you provide instances of pension funds being sued by their future beneficiaries for mismanagement or neglect of their climate responsibilities? Do you want to give some examples of that?
Yes. So the most recent, we'll work backwards, is Cushman and Wakefield. Now, this isn't a beneficiary lawsuit, it's a former employee alleging that the Westwood Small Cap Fund is highly exposed to uh, material climate related financial risks. However, it's not being assessed or monitored at all at the fund. They also allege that there's very high uh, management fees despite a lack of management of the most pressing risk affecting the fund. The fund within the 401k for Cushman and Wakefield is obviously underperforming quite considerably. So that was from February this year. Moving to October last year, the main case was obviously CPP Investments, which is a Canadian pension fund. So a collection of young beneficiaries to the fund are suing the pension fund manager for mismanagement of climate risks. They allege that the current system underestimates climate risk, plus the system in place disproportionately affects them. So it's causing, when they come to retirement age, they're faced with significant economic loss to their retirement pot. Then you've got obviously the famous UK case, USS, which is a university superannuation fund for the UK. This was quite a lengthy, ongoing dispute, alleging that the directors of the fund failed to properly assess climate risk. So the beneficiaries sought to push for disinvestment from fossil fuels. That was unsuccessful. And then finally, you've got Rest Superannuation Fund, a Australian pensions fund. This was settled outside of court, but the base of the case was a failure to disclose how the fund managed climate risk. So there's a lot going on, and I think there's definitely been an uptick
Yeah.
in pension funds being sued by their beneficiaries
Yeah.
for failure to sufficiently manage climate risks.
And finally, the other question we got from a future viewer of the podcast, who's not with this live discussion today, he writes that we covered in some detail this. I think the discussion we had last autumn when we did the thing with LPs around the world after the research we'd done, the quite significant differences we said that there were from the way US LPs are treating climate risk from pretty much the rest of the world, certainly from Europe and Canada and Australia. The US is doing it somewhat differently. I think we said at the time that they're relying, this is the US pension funds are largely relying on their portfolio managers for climate risk data in the way that they're not pretty much in most of the rest of the world. Is that a fair assessment, where putting it, Samantha?
I think it is. Just from, the example of the New York State retirement system, they really take a hands-off approach to climate risk. They kind of ensure that their managers are, responding to their questionnaires about it, but they don't have any kind of management capacity as unlike, UK pension funds like West Yorkshire pension fund, that they continually monitor things and push through what they want. But as for the US landscape as a whole, they are put in a very uncomfortable position. They are generally stuck between a rock and a hard place. You're faced with anti-ESG litigation from the top up, but you're still having beneficiaries want climate risk to be managed for the longevity of for the protection of their assets. So it's very difficult, I think. And obviously, recently you had Vanguard settle its anti-ESG lawsuit. BlackRock, State Street are still wrapped up in their one currently.
Excellent. I think we kept pretty much within the time. We said we'd be finished at quarter to the hour, and we're close to quarter to the hour. So I think we'll probably, unless anyone else has got any questions, they want to fire off, and we can deal with them in the next couple of minutes. We should probably, at this point, call it a day. I just want to thank you all very much for joining us this afternoon, or this morning if you're in the US. And we hope to see you the next time. As we've said in this discussion, the content of what we've been covering, which is on the necessarily a sort of broad superficial level, there's a lot more detail on everything we have been discussing in SII. And as I mentioned, we'll be getting in, for those of you who are subscribers, I think many of you are watching us today, we'll be consulting with you on the questionnaire we will be doing soon, very soon, even next week, for our research with GPs around the world by strategy. So have a good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you may be, and we hope we will see you the next time. Bye bye, everybody.
Bye bye.